our next speaker's name was already mentioned by Dagmara several times. I don't know if it was by purpose, but it fits perfect actually. And Ilona, I don't know, can you hear me? Can you see us? So give us a sign.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, perfect. So I will shortly introduce you, and it's really nice to see you and that you join us via Zoom today. And just another private remark, Ilona and me, actually our paths has already crossed many years ago at Krakow, and where we found out that we have another mutual interest besides art, and that was Christian Hebraism, when we were talking about Christian Kabbalah and reception of Jewish manuscripts and books by Christian humanists during mostly the Renaissance. So this is one of Ilona's research interests, but her research expands beyond that. She graduated from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with a dissertation that won an award, congrats for this, on the Hebrew book collection of Hartmann Schede. So Hebrew books, Hebrew manuscripts are actually like a resurfacing topic in her research. So she has since then worked and led various research projects at various universities across Germany. I noticed that actually you went from the north to the south and then you ended up in the very west. So you're now located at the University of Münster, if I'm right. And those research projects mainly focused also on book production, the reception of Hebrew manuscripts and books among Christians, matters of book I said it already, like production and transition and anything that's connected to the materiality, but also the fabrication and the reception and the transfer of books. And this, I will only mention the one monograph because I read it, and it's actually comprises also the this topic. It's called Jewish Book, Christian Book, Hebrew Manuscripts and Transition Between Jews and Christians in the Context of German Humanism. And this is only one part, and I saw that you wrote many articles, like micro studies, but also on a larger scale, and you're like similar like most of us, like covering a larger scale, but the center core is actually the books. So now the floor is open, and I'm happy to hear your lecture for today, and sorry for the delay, and thank you for waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. In 1933, when Umberto Cassuto was appointed by the Vatican Library to compile a descriptive catalogue of its Hebrew holdings, he established that the majority of Hebrew section in the Fonda Fuggeriana originated from a Venetian Crete. These manuscripts were collected by Ulrich Fugger, who was a member of the prominent banking family, best known as the founders of the world's oldest public housing complex, the Fuggerei in Augsburg. An inventory compiled around 1554 by Ulrich's librarian Martin Gerstmann provides the earliest evidence of 154 Cretan Hebrew manuscripts within the library. However, Fugger was not the one who bought the Cretan codices in Crete, as in 1541, when the first manuscripts were acquired there, Ulrich was only 15 years old. Before discussing the original buyer of the manuscripts in Crete and the circumstances of their sale, let us briefly examine their later history and their eventual transfer to the Vatican. Unlike other members of his family, Ulrich was not much interested in trade and banking, but spent most of his time reading. From a young age, he appreciated learning, supported authors and printers financially, and passionately collected books. In an attempt to create a universal library that would meet the needs of humanist scholarship, a desiderium of many book collectors of the time, Ulrich invested considerable energy and time and money in bringing together books in various languages, including Hebrew. His book collection grew significantly in the 1550s after he returned from his studies in Bologna to his hometown, Augsburg. As a result of the economic difficulties of the following years and his conversion to Protestantism, Ulrich accepted an invitation from the Palatine Prince Friedrich III and moved to Protestant Heidelberg in 1564. His book collection followed him and was deposited in the Palatine Library, located in the Heiliggeistkirche in Heidelberg. The books arrived in boxes and chests, whose contents were inventoried a few years later. In accordance with Ulrich's last will and testament, his book collection, including the Hebrew volumes, became the property of the Palatine Library after his death in 1584. During the 30 Years' War, the Palatine Library became a war trophy when Heidelberg fell to the troops of the Duke Maximilian of Bavaria in 1622, thereby depriving the Protestants of one of their most important intellectual attributes. Presented by Maximilian as a sign of piety to Pope Gregory, the Palatine books were loaded into 60 wagons and transported to the Vatican. While this later history of the Fugger's library is quite well reconstructable due to the multiple book inventories compiled in Heidelberg and the Vatican, how Fugger obtained such a large collection of Cretan Hebrew codices remains a mystery. In what follows, I will discuss what we do know, leaving, however, many questions open for further research. One of the most striking peculiarities in Fugger's Cretan volumes are the acquisition notes, written by an anonymous Christian buyer of the manuscripts in Crete, which allow us to date the acquisitions to 1541 until 43. Written in a crude script in the beginning or end of the manuscripts obtained, these notes usually include the date of the acquisition, the price of the manuscript, and an astrological sign of a planet, zodiac, or an alchemical symbol. Sometimes the signs were made up. For example, in the notes that begin with the letters PM surmounted by a cross, an abbreviation that apparently stood for the date of the acquisition, Primo Mai, 1st of May. The use of the astrological and planetary signs also seems to be random, with no correlation to the actual planets and stars associated with the given dates. Rather, the buyer assigned a different symbol to each group of manuscripts acquired on the same date from the same seller. The symbols were therefore likely used as identifying marks for such groups and may have served as a key for record keeping of the acquisitions. Apparently, the buyer also possessed a corresponding list in which the groups were represented by these symbols, followed by the number of manuscripts acquired and their prices. Hebrew manuscripts marked by similar symbols, each one standing for a shelf mark of a specific volume, were also found in other sections of the Palatine Library that did not derive from Fugger's collection, and were referred to by these symbols in Heidelberg inventories, reflecting a common practice of the time. Another peculiarity of the acquisition notes is the fact that they are sometimes encrypted. In many of them, the buyer of the manuscripts encoded the names of the Jewish sellers and sometimes did the same thing to hide the price as well. Although the language of the inscription is mostly Latin with some Greek interpolations, the buyer substituted some of the Latin letters for Hebrew and Greek ones, deliberately mixing up the three alphabets in the wording and Hebrew vocalization. This method of encryption is not particularly sophisticated and could be potentially deciphered by anyone who was acquainted with Latin, Greek, and Hebrew alphabets. By that point, European cryptographers had already developed much more complicated polyalphabetic systems of encoding to safeguard secret information. However, although simple substitution of the letters seems naive and ineffective, deciphering the encrypted words requires considerable effort. Hence, rather than render the information entirely illegible, the applied technique of encoding made the encrypted words simply less easily recognizable. As to why the Christian buyer would have felt it necessary to veil some details in secrecy, especially the names of the Jewish sellers, I will return later on. Judging by the acquisition notes, many manuscripts were acquired from the head of the Candiote Jewish community, referred to by his official title in Italian, Condestabulo. At the time of the acquisition, the head of the community was Eliyahu ben Elkanah Kapsali, mentioned by Dagmar as well, a prominent rabbi, historian, and author of Chronicles of Venice and other well-known works. Remarkably, the name of Eliyahu Kapsali was never explicitly mentioned in the acquisition notes, although the Christian buyer must have known the name of the Condestabulo. According to extant inscriptions, Kapsali sold a total of 21 manuscripts. In addition, 8 codices that the Christian buyer obtained in Candia bear ownership notes written by Eliyahu Kapsali or other members of his family, although they do not mention Condestabulo as the seller. This suggests that these manuscripts could also have come from Kapsali's bookshelf. While it is unknown what size Kapsali's private book collection was, judging by an average size of learned Jewish libraries of the time, he must have sold around a quarter of his books. Among other Jewish sellers was the cantor of the Candiote synagogue, referred to as Psaltes. Besides 7 manuscripts that he sold on the 1st of May of 5042, he gave the Christian buyer a compilation of biblical commentaries and Kabbalistic texts for free a week later, in the presence of Azzalino, Thomas Sacchellani, and Battista Omea, his Battista. Their Italian names suggest that the anonymous Christian buyer may have arrived to Crete from Italy, possibly from Venice, and brought with him his associates who helped him with the acquisition. All in all, the extant acquisition notes mention not only the specific manuscript in which they appear, but also other codices that were acquired on the same occasion. This seems to indicate that the anonymous buyer obtained 67 Hebrew manuscripts in Candia. However, this figure does not actually reflect the total number of the manuscripts acquired. Many more Hebrew volumes are sure to have been obtained from the Candiote Jewish community, even though their respective acquisition notes have been lost due to the removal of the flyleaves and manuscript bindings. In addition to the acquisition notes, the Candiote Hebrew manuscripts feature running Hebrew numbers from 1 to 175 at the beginning of each codex. These numbers were added to the volumes shortly after their acquisition in Crete by the Christian buyer or one of his associates. The Hebrew numbers run with lacunae, indicating that some manuscripts acquired have not come down to us. On the basis of the Hebrew numbers, then, at least 175 manuscripts must have been obtained in Candia. This extended group contains the texts authored by Cretan Jews, the mention of Crete in colophons as the place of copying, and the inscriptions of the previous Jewish owners who belonged to the Candiote Jewish community all disclose the Cretan provenance of the entire group that bears the Hebrew numbers. It remains unknown whether all 175 manuscripts were acquired within the 3-year period cited in the acquisition notes, or if the duration of the anonymous buyer's activities in Candia extended beyond this time span. As to the content of the acquired manuscripts, around 2/3 of the Cretan collection contain biblical commentaries and works on philosophy and science. The latter mainly represent the rationalist tradition of philosophical disciplines such as Hebrew translations of and commentaries on Averroes and Aristotle, as well as treatises on medicine, astrology, and astronomy. Kabbalistic texts constitute another large segment of the Cretan collection. Some of them appear in several copies and variations. The thematic scope of the Hebrew manuscript that were acquired in Candia greatly resembles other Christian Hebraica collections of the time, thereby revealing the same mindset and scholarly interests behind the collecting. In contrast to earlier periods, granting Christian access to Jewish books was not rare in the 16th century. As there are ample examples of Jewish-Christian cooperation in connection with books in Italy, it is likely that the situation was not much different in Crete. Most Candiote Jews were involved in business deals with their Christian neighbors. They regularly interacted with both local Greeks and Venetians, providing medical services, selling goods, and giving them loans. These daily activities may also have included the book trade. Jewish scholars and doctors needed to consult up-to-date non-Jewish professional literature and are sure to have owned some Latin and vernacular books as a. The circulation of books in both directions was part of a general intellectual exchange that took place between Jews and Christians in Crete and elsewhere. The effect of the extensive cultural exchange clearly became of concern for Jews to the point that it was addressed in the rabbinic responsa. Around the same time that Hebrew manuscripts were acquired in Crete, the question was posed to the Venetian rabbi Eliyahu Menachem Halfan whether Jews may instruct Christians in Hebrew. His response was that it is permitted for a Jew to teach Hebrew to a Gentile, as the language and Hebrew books were supposed to assist the Christian in understanding the meaning of the Holy Scripture, but oral tradition, and especially Kabbalah. Whether Candiote Jews were aware of the ban or not is unknown. Yet we cannot entirely rule out the possibility that they might have preferred not to be named openly in relation to the sale to a Christian of their books, many of which were Kabbalistic works. They therefore remained either unnamed or their names were veiled in the acquisition notes. The Kabbalistic books they sold included many copies of the Zohar, its Hebrew translation and excerpts, Sfirot and Merkava literature, as well as Kabbalistic polemics that the Candiote scholar Michael ben Shabtai Cohen Balbo formulated in 1466 against Moshe ben Shmuel Cohen Ashkenazi. Eliyahu Kapsali himself sold 2 Kabbalistic manuscripts, one including an incomplete copy of Sefer Pliyah, Sefer Yitzra, and extracts from the Zohar, and the second one, the Hebrew translation of parts of the Zohar. The esoteric content of the manuscripts neither prevented the members of the Candiote Jewish community nor its condestabulo from selling the manuscripts to the Christian buyer. However, as has been already mentioned, the Jewish sellers may not have felt comfortable to be named openly in connection with these transactions. Why would Eliyahu Kapsali and other Candiote Jews have wanted to get rid of their manuscripts in the first place? Manuscripts were undoubtedly an expensive commodity, as the prices paid for them by the Christian buyer demonstrate. According to the acquisition notes, about half of the manuscripts cost between 2 and 3 Cretan ducats per volume. The most expensive volumes that the Christian buyer acquired for 3 ducats are usually those that have a large number of quires, around 400 folios each, suggesting that the prices were not estimated on the basis of the manuscript's content, but in accordance with their material characteristics. Extra qualities, such as the use of parchment as a writing material and illumination, undoubtedly increase their value. While most manuscripts were written on paper, an illuminated siddur with 396 folios was made of parchment and cost 9 ducats together with another unidentified manuscript. Depending on who the seller was, the prices could be elevated or reduced. The Cantor, for example, being more cooperative than others, sold the Christian buyer 7 manuscripts for just 6 ducats and even promised to give him 1 manuscript for free. 2 other currencies mentioned in the acquisition notes, Mocenigo, which is a Venetian silver coin, originally valued at 1 lira, and perperon, namely a Cretan unit of account that was originally a Byzantine coin, were used to express the prices of cheaper manuscripts. The cheapest of these was a paper codex with 132 folios containing poems, verses, and arithmetic and medical material, which cost 2 perperi, equivalent to about a quarter of a ducat. All in all, the Jews around 87 ducats for their manuscripts, as follows from 58 codices that mention the prices. These are only a third of the acquired group, suggesting that he must have paid around 3 times as much in reality. Roughly speaking, that means 260 ducats, which was a fortune in Cretan terms. The economic reasons for selling books are therefore obvious. Venice's war against the Turks that ended in 1540 led to a rise in Jewish taxes in Crete and worsened relations between the Cretan Jews and their Christian neighbors, who suspected that the Jews were harboring Turks in the Jewish quarter, a situation that certainly affected local Jewish businesses. Cretan Jewry must have already been experiencing economic difficulties for a while, not only because of the war and related matters, but in view of the arrival of poor Iberian Jews en masse after the expulsion from Spain, which continued well into the 16th century. These factors, together with the need to ransom kidnapped Jewish community, to sell some of its property. How the Jewish community raised funds to reoccur in cases of kidnapping and capture is recorded in the regulations of the community, Takanot Candia. Around 1533, 2 Candiote Jews, Shmuel Roditi and Shemaria Agapoli, were kidnapped in Crete. The community managed to raise 80 ducats to pay ransoms. However, since the sum of money fell short of the amount, the community then sold 2 silver finials made with public funds to Eliyahu Kapsali, who paid about 3 ducats for them. Moshe Kazani, who signed the Takana together with other honorable members of the community, stated that it was allowed to sell a Torah scroll to redeem captives, so it must also be acceptable to sell the finials whose role was purely decorative. Redemption of captives is one of the central precepts in Jewish tradition. For the purpose of ransoming, Jewish religious or religious objects, a Torah scroll, which could otherwise only be sold for Torah study and marriage, and certainly other Jewish books. It is, however, unclear which selection criteria the Jews applied and how they decided which manuscripts to sell and which to keep. They sold both old and freshly produced codices that derived from Candiote and other areas of the Jewish settlement, such as Italy, Spain, and Ashkenaz. So the age of the manuscripts and their provenances did not play a significant role in the selection. The Jews not only offered the Christian buyer manuscripts of which the community had several copies, but also some that could not be replaced later. One of the sold copies of Sefer Plaza, for example, was considered unique. This manuscript was copied in the mid-15th century in Constantinople by Yosef ben Gershom Boniface. Around 1462, someone named Rabbi Yaakov brought a copy of its Genesis portion to Candiote. On the basis of this copy, he produced 9 quires that contained the first chapter of Genesis for an anonymous Jewish patron, who inscribed them with a lengthy note elucidating the provenance of his copy. The patron described Bonifatius Sefer Plaza as one of a kind, because, according to him, it was the only known complete copy of this work. Some years later, Bonifatius' exemplar and another Kabbalistic manuscript he copied in Constantinople were brought to Candiote. These 2 codices, as well as the 9 quires, recopied by Yaakov, ended up in the hands of the Christian buyer, though Bonifatius' Sefer Plaza was regarded as one of a kind. The same holds true for autograph manuscripts, such as Balbo's Kabbalistic compilation, which was unique by virtue of being autograph. The status of rare or unique that must have been attributed to the Kabbalistic codices among Cretan Jews suggests that their Jewish owners would have probably preferred not to sell them, and that they did sell them because the Christian buyer was particularly interested in these kinds of rare works. The buyer then must have first outlined his literary priorities and was then offered the kind of works he was looking for. Each of the protagonists of the story, the Candiote Jews and the anonymous Christian buyer, had their own agenda and goals. As a result of the need for cash in the Candiote Jewish community, its members offered for sale all kinds of texts, including those that traditionally were not supposed to be shared with Christians and those that could not be replaced. Seizing this opportunity, the Christian buyer was able to acquire one of the largest Hebraic collections of the time while he was in Crete. To conclude, Crete was one of the most important Venetian overseas territories. Situated at the crossroads of 3 continents, the island was a hub for trade and commerce and a key point for acquisition of cultural goods. For Venetian bibliophiles, Crete was an important source of classical Greek and Byzantine literature, and possibly by extension of Hebrew works. It is therefore conceivable that the anonymous Christian buyer of the Hebrew manuscripts from Venice. The choice of the text to acquire was determined by the contemporary Hebraist reading priorities. Similarly to other Hebraists, he was particularly interested in the text on Kabbalah, philosophy and science, and in biblical commentaries, but he also obtained many other texts that Jews were ready to sell. As a rule, however, Hebraic collectors who could afford 175 manuscripts would not themselves travel abroad to obtain books, but would engage their agents, usually experts in the given field of knowledge, to take care of the acquisition on their behalf. This could have been the case with the anonymous buyer. Exactly on whose behalf he acted is impossible to establish. It also remains unknown whether the original initiator of the acquisition was a Hebraist and used the acquired manuscripts for study as many of his contemporaries did. The manuscripts do not reveal any traces of Christian use in the form of marginal annotations, references, or other marks. It is also true that if the reconstruction of the events proposed here is correct, the manuscripts were in his possession only for a limited time, and he may have had no opportunity to study them properly and annotate them. The acquisition of the Cretan group for Ulrich Fogger's library marks another turn in the story, one that signals the transition of a Hebrew book to being a collectible artifact in the Nobel library. Hebrew books and Nobel collections whose owners could not read Hebrew did not necessarily serve scholarship per se, but symbolized it, sustaining the intellectual ambitions of their owners. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to ask her to close the presentation so that we can see you. So are there any questions for this really exciting presentation of Ilona? It was so fascinating. I think it's one of the presentations we heard today, which we can call it something like a starting point. I guess there's no any research except of yours or about this corpus, right?
Presentation. Thank you so much for that, by the way. You said that the price for the manuscript was determined mostly by the material it was made of. But then I was interested in knowing, because the buyer would want to kind of make sure that he could resell the manuscripts, right? So somehow the content of the manuscript did play a role, right? Because if you then buy like a manuscript, it might be valuable in terms of material, but then if no one wants to read it, then he won't be able to resell it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. The content was the primary reason for acquiring these volumes, but they could be cheaper or could be more expensive. So those which were like materially parchment with illumination, they were simply more. And again, the buyer didn't buy to resell it. He bought it
for himself,
to use it for himself.
Okay.
I assume we don't know who he was, right? Mm-hmm. But I assume he probably died. And that's why Ulrich Fogger could acquire the entire collection in block.
Okay.
That's usually what happened.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, super.
Yeah, so he didn't want to resell it.
Okay, super.
Thank you for the question.
Other questions? Maybe Asaf? Yes.
Oh, I cannot see you from here, but maybe you can hear me. One of the receipts that you've shown us was actually not for selling a book, but for selling tapuchei kesef, silver apples. If I roughly translated from the Hebrew, which are probably the rimonim for the Sefer Torah, right? And there it says this was the printed Hebrew page that you've shown us, and there it says that there's some kind of an apology. They sold it in order to get money to free some Jewish guy from prison. And they said, while it's allowed to even sell a Torah roll in order to free a captive, it is even more so allowed to sell only the rimonim or the tapuchei kesef, because they are just decorative and you don't learn the Torah from them. So I just wanted to say that I found it very, very interesting. Whoops.
Did you hear the question of Asaf? Or
Part
the
of
remark?
Part of it.
It's just it was just a remark, or was there something like a little question?
I was saying that on the printed invoice, the Hebrew printed invoice that you showed us, it was not a manuscript, but a rimonim.
Yeah, it was from Takanot, from Takanot Kandia,
Right.
from the regulations. Yeah.
Right. So it just said there that because you're allowed to sell a Torah scroll to free a captive, even more so you're allowed to sell the rimonim.
But that's why I showed. That's why I showed it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So, there are other questions, or yes, Katharina? Oh yes, maybe the last question, because we are.
No, thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering, do you have any sources that tell us about the history of these documents from the time when they arrived in the Vatican Library until Umberto Cassuto came to catalogue them? Do we know whether they were used by anyone? Were they just sitting in a bookshelf? Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from you.
Thank you for the question. The only thing we can judge by is the lack of annotation. So I don't think they were really very actively used. We have several inventories compiled during this time period that you mentioned. Well, they catalog books, right? And just the titles. Well, I don't think we have more than that.
Yes. So then, thank you so much, Ilona. It's such a pity that you're not can hear with us at Rhodes.
Yeah, I'm also sad about
Yes.
it.
But yeah, I think if there are any more questions, and everybody looks like a bit tired,